listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana Cristofero, and produced by Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Hey listeners, here's a little behind-the-scenes info for you. About a week before any interview, I send the guest a list of 8 to 10 potential questions. I ask them to look them over and let me know if there's anything on there that they don't want to talk about, or something I didn't put on there that they do want to talk about. Usually folks say something like, looks great, excited for the conversation. Occasionally they'll say, I don't really want to talk about number 7, or could we add this one? For this conversation, the guest, Kari Lyons-Price, wrote back and said, these look good, but they aren't at all what I want to talk about. Now, it takes some gumption to write something like that, but it's no surprise from Kari, because A, we've been friends forever, and B, Kari has a story she wants and needs to tell, and I'm so glad that she said that. My initial questions were all about what it was like to be a long-term caregiver for her parents, Hal and Sylvia, and what she's done with all that caregiving energy since they died. But before we could get to any of that, Kari needed to tell a different story. The story of how each of her parents died, and how those circumstances directly impacted her and her grief. It was such a good reminder that sometimes, in order to understand the grief story, our own or anyone else's, we have to be able to tell the death story. I'm going to let Kari tell you those stories, along with the story of how her parents lived, what it's meant to reckon with the circumstances of how they died, and what it's like to be in the world without them, or the caregiving responsibilities she had for so many years. Kari is a phenomenal storyteller who weaves insight with humor and does it all with an enviable sense of being grounded. I'm biased, of course, because we've been friends for over 25 years, but I think you'll quickly get what I'm talking about. Kari, thanks for being part of Grief Out Loud today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be here. It's my first podcast interview ever.
Well, that feels extra special since we've known each other for 8 gazillion years.
Yeah.
Since we met.
99 we met.
Yeah.
Oh
Day one of social work graduate school.
Day one.
Here we are.
That's right.
Well, when I met you, I certainly didn't think that many years later we'd be on a podcast talking about both of your parents and your grief, since I had the honor of meeting both Hal and Sylvia, but listeners have not. And so I wondered, what do you want us to know about Hal and Sylvia? What's something they were each really good at?
Yeah, that's such a great question. What were they really good at? You know, sometimes because we're so negativity bias oriented as humans, we love to pick out their flaws, even for our beloveds, right? But I think what my mom was really good at, I'll just say she was born in 1934. She grew up in the Midwest and very poor family, lived in the back of a hotel. There was 8 kids. And what she learned to do really well was have fun. She learned to make the best in any situation. And so she would in the past tense, she would dance anywhere with anyone. She was really good at that. And so that was kind of her way of making light, having fun, being engaged. That was definitely her signature as she got old too. And I'd say for my dad, you know, he was in the same age bracket. He was good at a lot of things, but I think what just keeps it really concise is the fact that he was good at occasionally listening to my mother when she said, Hal, get up out of that chair and come have some goddamn fun. And he, even though he liked to resist a lot, he would occasionally go, "Yeah, you're right. You're right. Let's go meet some people. Maybe not dance." I was kind of pushing it, but
Well, when you said that your mom was really good at having fun, I was like, that is not what I think of when I think of Hal. So that's an interesting,
right.
like, what do you think drew them together?
Yeah, I mean, he was such a workaholic in that like farmer to the land sort of way. And so for him, resting was sleeping. And fun was really what you did when you retired and you felt you could earn a day off. Um, what drew them together? It was outdoor sports. Yeah, water skiing, downhill. They both loved downhill skiing. My mom always liked to say that maybe it wasn't the passion, but it was good timing. It's like they were ready when they met to start a family and be coupled off. They were much older than their peers. They were in their mid to late 30s. So by some measures at the time, they were spinsters and
Yes.
bachelors.
Interesting that they found some way to come together to do something that was fun for your mom and was probably still a little bit of work for your dad because you were like working out. You're doing something.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Different definitions for sure.
So often, in order to tell the story of our grief, we have to tell the story of the death. And I think that's a part of the conversation that doesn't get as much airtime. We talk about the feelings we have and how we miss the person, but the actual how they died and how that impacted us. It can be hard to find places where people are able to listen to that. And I just wondered what for you feels important to say about how your parents died.
Yeah. Wow. I have to take a really big, brave gulp of air. But I would love to share with you. I'll start with my dad's death story. He died in October of 2019. And just a little bit of a backstory is that they had lived in the same house on the hill up in the country here in Washington State for 50 some years. And just 3 months before, I had very much coerced them to move into senior living, into care. They were in one apartment in independent living, but it was part of a facility. So, right down the hall and around the corner was assisted care. My mom had Parkinson's disease and had it for a really long time. She ended up having it for 20 years. But anyway, she needed more of the care and dad just needed to come with her. And so anyway, there they were in this independent living apartment. And, my brother and I and our family felt they were in the right place. Of course, they didn't necessarily agree, but that's unfortunately often how that goes. So anyway, my husband and I left for Orcas Island for a little getaway, say goodbye to mom and dad in their apartment. And it's one of those phone calls you dread, but know is coming one day. And we were on the ferry and a call came in that an urgent call from the staff saying, please call us immediately. There's an emergency. And so I called them back and they said he had just passed away. And what's really kind of unique, or the story that I'd like to share about the way he died, is this. And I didn't learn this for a few days after that phone call. So, of course, we rushed home. And in fact, it was 7 days exactly before I really learned the way that he died. So apparently what happened is that he fell over. He just fell out of his chair, sort of a regular low impact fall. My mom was there. And so she called the front desk with the landline and said, please help. Hal's fallen and we can't get him up because they tried. And they said, no, we don't pick people up off the floor. That's not something we can do. But we can call 911 for you. And my mom at that point said, no, that's too much bother. We don't want that. So she hung up and they kept trying. She was trying, he was trying. There was lots of probably swearing and upset, anxiety and all those things. 20 minutes later, mom called the front desk again and said the same thing. And this time she's really getting panicked because she can see that he's getting exhausted. And they say the same thing. Really sorry, we can't help you, but we can call the ambulance. And this time mom agreed. And I think it was like, he'd been on the floor at this point, 35 minutes or so. And then the ambulance came, and it was right at that like 2 minutes to 5 o'clock. And the woman that had been taking the calls clocked off. And the ambulance came, the EMTs came, and the minute they came in the room, they picked him up in his chair, put him in his chair, and he passed away from a massive heart attack. And they were actually heading back out the door because they realized, well, there could be a resuscitation here from heart failure. And they were running back out the door to go get their equipment. And my mother stopped them and said, look at the back of the door. There's this form there. And sure enough, just the week before, I had been with my dad at his primary care physician appointment, and we went over the POLST form, which is physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. And he checked the box that said no treatment. And mom grabbed the form and she showed it to them and said, no, don't do it. It's not what he wants. So there's that. Whew. Kind of a small miracle in a way, because he really was wanting to go. But what makes this whole thing really, really difficult is that it wasn't for 7 days when I called an all-staff meeting with the staff that I found out nobody ever came to their door. No staff after those 2 phone calls and those 30 minutes ever even came to see how they were, or to be with them, to give comfort, to say that help is coming soon, to help them understand why they were in this place where they're supposed to be, and I'm doing air quotes, cared for, but yet no one is coming to care for them in what they felt like was a crisis. So I can still remember that moment in that meeting when that information hit me, that nobody came. And as a daughter and their primary power of attorney and person that made this decision, with some coercion around, this is best for you, you will be taken care of here. It kind of felt like someone had just put my palm, all pads of fingers, on a hot coil. And that it just wasn't true in that moment. And that no one was there for your parents. And none of that's to say that he should still be alive because he wanted to go. But what was so hard later in the grief process was this just white hot anger and resentment that felt in the narrative was he didn't die a respectful death. So that was a lot to take in a sudden death, especially given this sort of way. And what happened after that was I took that sort of anger and resentment and sense of injustice, and I called all the other long-term care, senior living, corporate headquarters, and executive directors of local facilities. And I said, is this a standard? Like, what is the deal here? Help me understand how this can happen. Because I'm a member of the public who I don't remember that in the marketing verbiage, right? I don't remember them saying, we care for them except when they fall on the floor. And not even to say, honestly, what I learned in my research and talking to legislators and state of Washington health boards was that when someone's in independent living, that facility or whoever owns that place does not is not under any obligation of care. There is no contract for care. It is a landlord lease agreement. So I was like, wow, that's news to me. Very different. Again, not what you're told. So by the time we ended up meeting with the legislators, COVID had just landed. So they were very preoccupied. And my small issue and my dad's death was swept under the rug. What I was hoping for was that maybe they would be able to mandate to these folks that market to the public for disclosure, to say that assisted living is one thing, skilled nursing is another thing, but with independent living, there is no care. We are under landlord-tenant law.
Kari, I have lots of follow-up around that, but I'm curious just in this moment, knowing that that's a narrative you've probably shared with yourself many times, and it's taken, 5 years to kind of come to this place of sharing it in this way. What is it like to put all that together and to verbalize it?
Yeah, it's still, it still makes my diaphragm tight, makes me hot. It's still, there's some flares in there of, yeah, what happened in that sort of disbelief and a little bit of anger. And I think what time has done, I mean, I've absolutely dove into forgiveness and all the layers that help me come to peace with it, because after all, that's what it's really about now, is how I hold it in my system and whether or not I still want it to hurt me or, be something I'm okay with or even at peace with. So yeah, and I think so. I realized, I think if I go back, like the beginning of that red hot coil, that anger, all that, the hotness of that early stages of grief, for me, my reactivity, I really had to do, I had to take action. I tried to meet with the CEO of this unnamed corporation, which is a large senior living corporation in our region. And I worked with their clinical executive team for 6 months to make some changes to the way they did trainings and worked with their employees. And so I realized that, to kind of vent, if you will, like we vent the flames in real fires, I needed activity or, real doing to sort of vent that early grief stage. And it wasn't until much later, kind of when I landed in what I think of as the soft layer of just loss and sadness, that I really almost felt like I'd achieved something. This kind of sounds funny to say, but it's like, oh, this is the grief I am ready for, kind of hoping for. It felt more familiar too.
What really stood out to me as you were sharing the story, Kari, is that for some folks, when the death feels preventable, and that feels like the injustice, right? That there was something went wrong at the hospital, or someone was driving under the influence and hit their person, whatever it might be, like this death was preventable because of someone's action. And what came through was less of that piece for you of the death being preventable or even needed to be preventable, but more of the context in which it occurred, and that lack of just a human coming to be a human with your mom and your dad.
Yes, absolutely. It wasn't so much the circumstances. I mean, yes, the general, it's not so much a law, but the industry standard around not picking the builders up off the floor. I can understand where it comes from. As a daughter, I don't like it, but I don't have to like it. But the fact that no one arrived to just give care and comfort, because I think, is that just human, where was the human nature, the human touch, just any humanity?
Well, because I'm imagining if your parents had been say on a road trip, and they were staying in a hotel, and your dad had fallen and your mom had called the front desk, and the front desk may have said something similar like, we'll need to call 911. Someone may have still come to the room to
Yeah.
just be with your mom during that time too.
Right. Right. And this is, this is a woman that had some dementia. We're not talking about just a regular human, like someone that even has less capability of regulating stress. So, yeah. I mean, eventually, they admitted they made a mistake. And of course, that plays into those sorts of red hot feelings too, around when the executive director took 2 days to call me. In fact, she never called me. I called her. And I just inquired. I said, "Why did you wait?" She said, "Well, some people don't want to talk about death right away." I do. So give me the chance. That's the kindest answer I could think of. Give me the option. Don't make me think you're ignoring it.
Oh, I can't decide which question to ask you next because I have so many. I'm curious how you and your mom talked about that and how your kind of reaction aligned or didn't align with hers.
Yeah, that's a great question because it was tricky territory. We had different responses. Hers was really immediately, maybe not, within minutes, but within days or weeks, her response was, "Oh, how lucky he was. That bugger. He went in a moment, in a flash." Can you see my mom saying this? Like,
Yes.
that SOB, he got off real quick.
Left me here to clean up this mess.
That's right. And, I mean, we're not 88 yet to have a degenerative illness. So I have no idea what it's like to kind of hope that your own death gets to be quick. And that's the place she was coming from. Yeah. So for me, kind of going down this early road of blame and, anger and what the hell just happened here? This isn't right. Yeah, she wasn't so much. She let me have it, but she wasn't I certainly didn't lambast her with all of that. I let her know in a very gentle way that I needed to kind of, for the public, I needed to follow up on some things and understand and see if there was some ways to make it better so that, maybe someone could come into the room and offer more. And she understood that part. She herself wished that someone had showed up to help out.
From what I remember about your dad and the stories you have shared with me, it's interesting that you talk so much about like the heat and the fire of it, because your dad to me was such a heated, fiery guy. And I don't know, there's some parallel there between what your early grief felt like and his personality and his way of being in the world.
Well, yeah. And I think I just inherited some of that too, right? Yeah, no, that did not go unnoticed. Yes, the way that he went out was very much in a way the way he lived. A little fiery, kind of getting his way or efforting to get his way. But it was only a month before that we managed to take him for his last trip to his beautiful lake cabin. And when we got back home, he sat in his chair just exhausted. I mean, he could just barely walk at this point and move and enjoy the trip. He's glad he went, and I sat next to him and he just burst into tears and said how much he wanted to go. And he wished he could go soon.
What has that memory meant to you?
I think it's been like a little healing balm in the sense of, oh, he said what he needed and wanted, and he kind of got it. There's nothing, in some ways, there's nothing better than that. So yeah, that's been a helpful memory to hang on to, honestly. And even though there's it's not sadness, it's tenderness. There was so much tenderness and vulnerability, but I'll always remember that just with my heart sort of smiling because it was a rare moment where our hearts met. And that's very sweet.
Are there ways in which what happened with your dad shaped some of the decisions that you made as a caregiver for your mom?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was actually really difficult. So he died October, buried 3 weeks later. Anyway, we had about a month and then it was in the holiday season and I was desperately trying to move her. As you can imagine, even though this facility offered assisted living, which she then very much needed because she was declining fairly acutely without him around, there was no way in hell, no way in hell I was going to let her stay there. Um, so, yes, I had to make a very difficult decision. And she didn't want to go. She loved her little apartment. It was so cute. She had it decorated the way she wanted it decorated, and she had a little balcony. And there's nothing she loved more than having sunshine on her face, sitting outside. And once you move into the higher level of care, no more balconies. So that was another really, really difficult time where my brother and I, but mostly I, had to make that decision about where is she going, and it's pretty much against her wishes. So yeah, I interviewed that poor staff at the next place she went, like there's nobody's business. Of course they heard the story about how my dad passed, and they 100% got it, and of course guaranteed me that would not happen under their watch, which is kind of a lead into how she died. Would you like me to share that?
Yeah, I was going to say, because context is such a big part of your mom's end of life as well, as we enter into like 2020, 2021, 2022, COVID-19, your mom needing facility care. Like there's a big part there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So she went into just after Christmas. She moved in of 19. So yeah, COVID was, on the scene February, March of 20. She lasted there about 3 months as she started to become just severely depressed. My mother never even knew what that word meant, but she was someone that thrived on social connection. So we ended up moving her into private care with a cousin into her home. Turned out to be the most amazing thing. And this is kind of a side note, but I think it's really important for my grief after my dad died. And this might sound odd to have her move further away. At first, it was really hard for me because all of a sudden it just felt like, both of them were gone. But the sweetness that came later, I was still getting to visit. I was getting to visit her, full stop. And it was COVID, without masks. And we get to go outside and just make those decisions ourselves around risk and risk management and not have to have a facility in the middle. But it also gave my nervous system the biggest break it had ever had in 10 years of caregiving for them. And then the loss of my dad. And so the time when she spent a whole year in private care during that first year of COVID was this beautiful gift for my whole body, mind, and heart to make sense of who am I now and this grief process. And in some ways, I think of it as life-saving for my physical health. So she ended up coming back a year later when my cousin had had enough. My mom, in some ways, was not an easy person. She had a lot of needs. And anyway, it just wasn't a good fit. So she came back into care at the same place. She ended up passing away another year later, so in July of 22, she went outside, which she did every day. She needed to worship in the sun, as she liked to call it. And I think it was those moments too, she could remind herself that by closing her eyes and looking up, that she wasn't an old person in a care home, as she liked to call it. She was just someone sitting in the sun. But unfortunately, we were in a heat wave, and her mild dementia, her Parkinson's, the convergence of poor judgment, and lots of things, staff that are overworked. She ended up dying of heat stroke outside. She was outside too long, collapsed, became unconscious, and was rushed to the ER. And we had about 6 hours left of her life with her in ICU. So she never came back to consciousness, which was really painful. It's hard not to say goodbye. I'd really hoped that after my dad died, suddenly I'd get to say goodbye to Mom, but that's not what the universe had in store. So I think with Mom's situation, it was the way my brother and I kind of came to terms with it. I wouldn't say peace, but terms with it pretty quickly by comparison of Dad's, was that we knew she was doing what she loved and she chose to sit outside. We felt there was this beautiful image we'd be left with, knowing that she did that instead of sitting in her room calling out for help or just watching the TV, or she was at least somewhere that she wanted to be.
So really having to hold that duality of, in some ways, how she died was in alignment with some elements of her. And then there's the part for you of not being able to say goodbye with any consciousness. And that idea that your mom had been dealing with health challenges for so many years is such a slow piece. And then her death to feel so sudden and unexpected, which can be very confusing.
Yeah. And she was really at the point, it was a very difficult time in her care. We were just about ready to have to decide to move her to a higher level of care because she was unable to really walk anymore. And that was just a decision I just could barely face. Just didn't want, none of us wanted to really face that reality because of the fierce nature she had to be alive and to be walking and be engaged and to be doing. Yeah. And when I've been reflecting, getting ready for this call on grief and kind of the grief journey I've had, my parents' deaths, I also kind of had this like aha, sort of a duh moment when I recognized that the minute my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's back in 2002, I kind of started grieving then. There was this long, slow grief that was part of every time I saw her, when I recognized her face was a little more masked, or she could do a little less in the kitchen, or she could, dance her favorite dance a little less safely. And then, of course, when she lost so many things, the ability to drive and to cook and to eat successfully. So much grief just on that slow dial of time. So maybe people talk about that with Alzheimer's and those sorts of classic older adult diseases. And it's so true. And it's just interesting to kind of hold the more stark grief around loss, especially for me, the sudden losses, and then this sort of long, slow, degenerative sort of grief. And I mean, you just can't compare them, even though as humans we like to do that. So yeah, all I can say, I think about that is that it feels like grief has been a part of my life and infrastructure for a very long time. I know they call you the grief lady, Jenna, but I
You would
think
also like that
I think
designation?
I sit on the council somewhere. I'm just saying.
Well, in the field, there's the term anticipatory grief, which is usually the term that
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
use to describe that experience. But for me, the wording has always felt like it's fallen short because it
Yeah.
sounds to me like I'm anticipating that I'm going to be grieving this person's death at some point because I'm now faced with the reality that their life is going to be shorter.
Right. Like you're not grieving now.
And I understand like people like to put stuff in a timeline, but it just diminishes it in some way because it's just as real as the grief of when someone has died. It's different, but it's just as real.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so, so painful. Some of those, yeah, they're still just in me. I can still feel them. Like it's the witness, it's both. It's witnessing the loss for them, right? And then it's also your own felt sense to have your loved one lose that thing. Like I said, I'm not going to compare, but there are certainly times when I could say the grief of mom losing financial control and taking away her car keys was, wow, just about as painful as all of it.
Well, and the thread that comes through so strongly, I feel like your whole family line, particularly your parents, is autonomy. And it seems like in the way that you've reckoned with your grief is to find some shred of autonomy for both of them in each of their death stories.
Yes, you got it. It's true. It's a very strong narrative. My dad, one of his favorite stories to tell, was it was to own the story that his parents were pioneers. They were born in 1905 and 1907, and they kind of pioneered in terms of, a farm and came to this new place from the South. So there's some of that that's very much the story of people that moved west, right? I mean, it's in our DNA.
Well, that makes me think of a question that just popped into my head, which is what has both of their deaths meant for your autonomy?
Oh, big time. I'm free now. They are so happy. There were so many times my dad looked at me and he said, I'm so sorry. We're such a pain in your ass, or I'm looking forward to when you get to be, without us. Kind of as a joke, but kind of serious. Um, and yes, I very much embrace the fact that my life is just starkly different. And I feel as if I'm getting to just start over entirely because it was such a long period of time. And I lived literally down the street from my parents. And so our lives were very, very intertwined and embedded. Um, the regular sort of years where we just sort of looked in on them and had daily phone calls. And there was about 5 years, and there was about 5 years of, intensive caring and decision making and challenges. So, yes, it's a whole new time for me now and right in time for menopause. So let's just pack them in. What's this body thing? What's this new life thing? No parents. Every day's new, girl. Every day.
Well, that's almost two different questions then around, because I was going to ask you, like, you've been so illustrative in describing grief along these different steps. And I was going to ask, like, how does grief feel and show up for you now? But then I also wonder, what does it mean to be in the world without parents and their physicality?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the same question.
It's interesting. I often question in my own system when I'm having, any sort of a challenge or a bump, and I think, what the heck is that? Is this low mood or my inability to sleep grief, or is it menopause? I mean, that's kind of serious, like untangling. Generally speaking, I'd say my grief now is punctuated by anniversaries, and there's that longing It's the missing of the laughs, and I'm renting out their house, and so going there and just memories, and there's some longing and some sadness, but I'd say it's primarily just wonderful, joyful memories, feeling so happy that we had so long together and that they were who they were and that I got to be who I am. And yeah, and not having parents in the world is a little harder. I mean, when you ask it in that way, there's definitely, I think the whole first year, which was just last year, after mom died in 22, was just this very strange. I felt like if there was a cord, that connected us either spiritually or energetically to parents, it had been cut. It just felt like I was kind of wandering the earth, sort of floating in this no woman's land, feeling very disconnected and wondering when I would find my feet back kind of in a new place. I mean, I think there was this literal, physical, spiritual chasm. And I suppose maybe it's meant to be that way because I felt like I was seeking my own new foundation, my own new life and place and sense of belonging that was to me, because we often associate belonging in particular with family. And that's great, but I also think it's limited. And can cause us a lot of suffering if we don't have great relationships there too. So
Yeah, there's a whole other conversation to be had about having family in physical form and also feeling not belonging.
yes, 100%.
That's a different conversation.
Very, very different. Yeah. Years of therapy.
So where or how do you find your foundation now?
Well, the where I think it's now just been embodied. I suppose it's reminding myself that it's in my body. And that's, I teach mindfulness and do some coaching and I'm often humbled in those moments when I find myself suffering and I say, "Oh, you've forgotten your own sense of belonging and connection because you're looking for it outside." Right? When that like treat or that time with someone you think is going to fill you up in a particular way and it doesn't. That reminds me that the where I need to be is just in remembrance that I am enough and that sense of connection and belonging is right there. It's right here. And sometimes the how I think has to do with nature. I feel a deep connection to my own spirit or deepest sense of self outside. We get this perspective. The world opens in ways that the small self can't see when we're not in the trees. So when I can even just go out in my own patio chair and look up at the aspen tree and go, "Oh, yeah. Yeah." Or sometimes I need to go out and just feel the longing, the loss, the grief, the emptiness in the moment. I mean, it's not always about coming back to feel smiley and happy and belonged. That's not a word. But to just let the feeling be whatever it is. And that itself can be a pathway, right? Back to our deepest self and connection, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that in some way, the grief itself, letting it be there, being open to experiencing it can be part of that rebuilding of the foundation.
Yes.
Which I think is
yes.
very confusing and seems sort of contradictory, particularly when you're very new to the grief.
Yes, 100%. It kind of makes me think about the question you had in writing for me. What's new about grief now? And I think that's kind of what that question you just asked. But I think for me, I had this before my parents died. I really thought of grief sort of in this typical process that I experienced more as a teenager or a young adult, loss of grandparents, maybe people I didn't know that well, but that I would have sadness and then kind of get over it, so to speak, or maybe just even compartmentalize it and whatever it was. I think what feels new about it this time around, in the biggest sense, is that I really gave myself time and space to be a person that grieves. I think there's more action. I felt like it had to be more active. And maybe that's because over my life, I've learned that what I don't tend to, guess what, gets stored down there in the cells. And, I don't want to hang on to any of that toxic shit for a long period of time. So I think I've tended more to my grief in a more conscious way with my parents, especially because of that red hot anger nature. It wasn't exactly familiar or didn't feel safe for me a lot of times in my system. So I was like, okay, I'll call in the supports and make some time for myself and see what is needed here to tend that grief.
Well, Kari, anything else that feels important to share to not that we ever complete this story, but at least this chapter of the telling of your story?
Mm-hmm. I'll probably bungle the quote, but there is a beautiful quote that essentially says, grief is the receipt of loving well. And that has brought me some comfort through difficult times. That, yeah, just because I feel sad, longing, or emptiness, or anger, yeah, I feel it because I really cared. I really loved. I was really invested, connected. And what more do I want in this life than to have those things? Because that's what I do want in this life. So I think maybe it's making friends with grief, or at least maybe not pushing it away as much as our culture certainly wants us to tidy that up, right? And put a bow on it. To really encourage people to make space for their own process. And to not do it alone. Our family's narrative around independence also is very closely tied into, pulling your socks up and doing that by yourself. Pulling your socks up, not having someone else pull your socks up.
Preferably alone in a room where we don't really have to witness
watch
it very much.
Yeah. Please go cry somewhere else. But that there's no better healing in my experience than recognizing when you need help and really letting your people in on it. Because there is a lot of beauty in just giving space or time and permission to let someone else show up. Sometimes we have to really ask. We could all do better in this department for sure. And I think these conversations and just listening to your podcast, even though I like to think of myself as someone who's experienced with grief, I learned so much when I listened to your people's stories. It's just heart-opening, awe-inspiring, and just these are the things that make me proud to be a human, and doing my best to just keep walking the path in the only way that I know how. I appreciate you very much.
Well, Kari, thank you for letting me be in it with you. I don't know the language you just used about how important it can be to let people in to it with you. So thank you for letting me into it with you and our listeners, and for sharing in your unique way of humor mixed with such grounded insight. So thank you today.
All the pleasure's all mine, friend. Thank you.
And listeners out there, you know I say this each and every single time, but thank you for being part of the show, for making these conversations mean something. I definitely love to hear from you. So if you would like to email me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougie.org. I'd love to hear if there's an episode that really spoke to you, or if you have a story you would like to share on the podcast. dougy.org is also our main website, where you can find information about all of our local programming, our free downloadable resources, and each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. And excited as always to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. Hope you'll join us again next time.